Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna, and I'm once again bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you sports fans out there like you and me. And if you're new here, make sure to hit the subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on whatever podcast network you're on, rate and review the show and follow me on social media at Very Cold Lasagna. And this is episode number 327 of this icy yet spicy podcast. And in this episode, we're here to look back at the 2025 season that was for my team, my NFL team, the San Francisco 49ers, as it has recently come to a wrap. It's not too long ago where it recently finished up. I reviewed all their games from this past season. Well, as it has been in pretty much all the years that I've done this podcast, but nonetheless, another season has come to a close, and well, still no Super Bowl in sight, unfortunately. But this episode is dedicated to looking back at the season that was for my 49ers, and what's ahead for their offseason. So that being said, let's begin. Let's look at how their season went and what to look forward to in the offseason. So when you look back at my San Francisco 49ers in going into the regular season, when you look at how they were at this point last year, this point in time in 2025, like in the offseason, not exactly great. Not exactly in a good position, coming off the heels of another Super Bowl loss, Super Bowl 58 loss, because, well, they they lost in another heartbreaking fashion, but it was even worse than Super Bowl 54. And what followed was an underperforming, injury mania plagued 6-11 season. Many of their starters got hurt, that including quarterback Brock Purdy. And not a great season. Not a great season at all. And that was capped off by another blowout loss in Arizona. So they finished 6-11. They were dead last in the NFC West. And well, at least the good thing was, it was the first time in quite some time that it was an early finish to the season. So we got to enjoy, quote unquote, Cancun per se last year. But when you look at this, when you looked at last year's offseason, the primary focus was on multiple things that I mentioned last year in my season recap for this team. It was to improve the defense, and then the big question was whether or not to extend Brock Purdy because, well, while he has been playing well, there were some questions on whether to give him that big fat contract and how, if you were to give him that big fat contract, how much would and should the 49ers give him in total for that kind of money. And then obviously when you look ahead towards the short and the long-term future of this team, and they want to keep competing, they have to inject some youth because there were a lot of old guys from the playoff years. They are pretty old, and there were a couple of bad contracts on this team. And some of those old guys were entering free agency, and they had to make a decision on whether or not they were going to keep them around. Well, we got those answers in last year's offseason. Well, first of all, they let go many of their key yet old starters, like to the likes of Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga, and Charvarius Ward. They let them go in free agency, and then you had Deebo Samuel. He got traded to the Washington Commanders for a 5th round pick. I mean, he was on the other side. He's about to turn 30. And we got a 5th round pick in return. So, that being said, some of the key vets were gone with. In the draft, we injected some youth, mainly through the defense. I'm not sure why they objected to the offensive line again, but we'll get into that in a little bit. They injected youth in the defense through the draft, adding the likes of edge rusher Mykel Williams, defensive tackles Alfred Collins and CJ West, and then getting a corner to help out Renardo Green and Amador Lenore in Upton Stout. And then another big hire to replace the very terrible Nick Sorensen, who majorly downgraded the defense in 2024, was bringing back Robert Saleh, who was fired by the New York Jets very early in the 2024 campaign. They brought him back. They brought Robert Saleh back to help develop this young defensive core while improving the mess that Sorensen left from the 2024 campaign. Meanwhile, obviously, that big question that I mentioned earlier about Brock Purdy, that was answered. They indeed gave him that big fat contract, 5 years, $265 million. I think that's the final. I remember it correctly. That is the final number. But anyway, they gave him that big fat contract alongside giving extensions to George Kittle and Fred Warner. Other than that, it was a relatively stress-free offseason for the first time in a long while. I was very glad for that. Even if there were some questionable antics like Diamador Lenore getting arrested for a misdemeanor, if I remember correctly, that was later resolved, relatively stress-free. And obviously the Brandon Ayuk saga that we're obviously going to keep talking about throughout this episode. But the 49ers went on about their business with barely any issues, barely any distractions, and they got the contract extensions that I mentioned with Purdy, Kittle, and Warner. They got it all done before June. They didn't want to have to deal with that over prolonging bullshit all the way into September. The only one that was the only one that came up late was Jawan Jennings because, well, he thought, oh, if those guys got an extension, I want one too. So I'm gonna hold out in training camp for some stupid reason. He brought that up so late, but yeah, they re-signed him. They gave him a 1 year extension, like a couple month extension for this season, and yeah, but they got that resolved, I guess. So in general, when you looked at the preseason outlook for this team, by letting their old stars go in favor of youth, at least on the defensive side of the ball, it became apparent the goal for this past year, was to develop the rookies and the second-year players and the third-year players while trying to make the playoffs. They were trying to have that, I guess you could say, that Golden State Warriors mentality by having youth, but at the same time, always trying to make the playoffs. That the Warriors have had under Steve Kerr when you still have Steph, you still have Draymond, but also all these young players that for some reason they still make the playoffs, but they don't get past the conference semifinals since 2022. But anyway, yeah, that was basically the Niners' goal going into this year. It was a retool year, but they're still trying to make the playoffs. So then we get to the regular season for this team. I'm going to talk about the bad things, the good things, and just my general consensus when the season was over and done with. Obviously, we got to get into the negatives first because, well, there were plenty in this very up and down season. The first one that comes to my mind is the offense. The offense and the lack of receiving depth that this team had. The team entered the season with Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings, Demarcus Robinson, and rookie Jordan Watson as its top receiver, which honestly was not exactly promising. Pearsall, he missed half of the season. He had a PCL injury, which was not exactly great. And he missed half of the games. Jawan Jennings wasn't the same reliable route runner or catcher, even if he had his moments, whether with Mac Jones or Brock Purdy under center. Jordan Watkins, for some reason, they drafted him, but yet he was in Kyle Shanahan's infamous doghouse. And Demarcus Robinson was barely used. Jacob Cowing, let's also not forget about him, the second-year guy. He missed all of this year with a hamstring injury from a preseason game. And yeah, he never came through. It must have been a very serious hamstring injury. So they signed on Kendrick Bourne, who was released by the Patriots just before the season. He signed back on with the team, Remember, he was with the team when that they drafted. But after making an early season impact, he didn't really do much the rest of the way. So, yeah, this overall receiving room, it wasn't really great. They didn't have that vertical threat other than Ricky Versal, who was in and out of the lineup with injury. Sure, he had a great feel-good story last year with the shooting and all that, but I hate to say it, but he was not reliable with his ability to stay on the field, because the best ability is availability, regardless of how well you play. So, given the fact that the leading receivers were Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle, then, even as a filthy casual fan, that's a big problem. And then you look at this offensive line, which is still very offensive to me. And honestly, to everybody else, especially given what happened at the end of this season. I don't get it. Like, the fact that this unit, this core group of players, that this front five that still wasn't addressed in the offseason, it still comes back. How many seasons are we in under Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch? And they always fail to address this. They always fail to address this part of the offense. It came back to bite Kyle Shanahan in the ass when this offensive line fails to protect Brock Purdy and Mac Jones. They allow both of their quarterbacks to get repeatedly hit, repeatedly get hurt. They don't allow any time to throw. The O-line also made Christian McCaffrey look bad this year in rushing, because they produced one of, if not the worst, run blocking units in the league due to their inability to open run lanes for him. Now, sure, they do every so now and then, but they like analysts and like even like the commentary teams, like they could see it with the eye test. You can see it with the eye test too as a fan. This offensive line is so offensive. It is so offensive that CMC can't get anything going on the ground. Brian Robinson Jr. can't get anything going on the ground. The only production that running backs can get in this offense is through the air in the receiving game. But as a runner, as a pure ground game, this offensive line cannot run block for crap. So aside from Trent Williams, Cole McKivitz, Jake Brendel, and whoever was in the left guard rotation, whether it be Ben Barch or Connor Colby, and then Dominic Pooney, they all sucked, whether it was pass or run blocking. But the biggest offenses were Jake Brendel and McKivitz. They were terrible because they always missed their guy to block, or they let them get away. Like after the first motion, it'll be like, if for all my audio listeners out there, they're like using their hands, they're hand fighting, but then the pass rusher beats them. Like they easily beat them. Like that's very bad. That is very bad. And then probably the biggest thing of all was injury mania running wild. Somehow, like it kept on going. It kept on going, and it once again attempted to derail the team to another lost season and another losing season. The defense took the biggest brunt of it, with Nick Bosa going down to another ACL injury in week 3 in the home opener against Arizona. Then they lost Fred Warner 3 weeks later in Tampa Bay to a broken, fractured ankle. And then rookie Michael Williams had his ACL sacrificed to the demon gods of Death Life Stadium when they faced the Giants. Always got to be Death Life Stadium, where they don't want to replace the turf. And then you even got the backups hurt. Like the backups even got hurt too. Like, how is it the fact that like when the starters get hurt, the backups have to follow this year? That's insane. This is insanity. Tatum Bethune, the backup to Fred Warner, got lost in the regular season finale with a groin injury. Nick Barron was lost to a serious concussion like just a month prior. And then the defensive line rotation had to be switched in and out due to weekly injuries. Like this defense, it was significantly beaten up that Robert Saleh barely had anything to work with. He tried to make something out of nothing, but he got absolutely nothing out of it. He had absolutely nothing to work with because there were just way too many injuries. Now, but even when they were healthy, though, they still were kind of a meh unit. But the straws that broke the camel's backs were obviously the injuries to Bosa, Warner, and then Michael. And then, the injuries to the backups didn't help either. Meanwhile, on the offensive side, they were not as bad, but still not great. Brock Purdy missed more than half of the season with a turf toe, to which he initially was going to come. He initially came back week 4, but it was clear that that he was rushed back after first suffering in the season opener in Seattle. But they clearly rushed him back in week 4, so that led to him missing several more games. So Mac Jones, who was playing in relief of Purdy, he got hit a lot. He repeatedly got hurt a lot during his time as a fill-in starter. He played through a nagging knee and ankle injury for a few weeks in the time that he filled in for Purdy. Meanwhile, you had George Kittle missing the first month of the year with a hamstring injury after getting the team's first touchdown in Seattle. And then he didn't play afterwards. And then he later on, which we'll talk about, he suffered a much more significant injury. Ricky Pearsall, as I mentioned, missed a month plus because of a PCL injury against the Jags. And he later re-aggravated it in the Bears game, along with picking up a hamstring injury, which caused him to miss a game, the season finale. And then Trent Williams missed the last 2 games of the year, a regular season, with a hammy injury. So, injury mania was running wild once again, just like it was last year. And 2020? Fucking yikes, man. Like this, and also in 2022, 2021? Like what is it, man? Like, what is it that is continuing to keep injury mania running wild almost every single year under Kyle Shanahan? Like, some people are saying it's the electrical substation next to the training facility. It's the over aggressive practices that Kyle Shanahan has in every week, and especially in training camp. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the terrible training staff in the strength and conditioning, the medicine people over there. I don't know. Something, I believe during this offseason, something has to change with how Kyle Shanahan does things, because these injuries need to stop. I get it. Injuries are bad luck, but the consistency of these injuries, it has to be more than that. It has to be more than just bad luck. There's clearly something going on within that organization that they're just constantly getting injured, especially with these season-ending injuries. Something's clearly up with how they practice, and it's not just a electric substation or whatever the frick these conspiracy theorists are throwing out there. And the last thing that's biggest, I guess, is the whole Brandon Ayuk thing. It initially looked like Ayuk was working his way back to fully recovering from his ACL and MCL tears at the 49ers facility during training camp, despite his weird social media activity. Now, it would have been great to have him back because the 49ers were clearly sorely missing a deep vertical threat aside from Ricky Pearsall. But then much later, in this past November, it was later reported by various journalists, beat writers, that he hasn't been around the facility at all for a month, and maybe even so far back in training camp. He never even reported. He stopped talking to the team, which led to the team voiding future guarantees and even the future money in his contract. So fucking yikes, man. So it became pretty obvious that Brandon Ayuk is a big baby. He started being a big baby after they lost the Super Bowl in Vegas because, well, he knew he was contract eligible, extension eligible at least. And yeah, he prolonged the extension talks to the point where he wanted to get traded. And when he refused the trade destinations that John Lynch was offering in order to prolong how much money he was going to get, and he prolonged it to the point where he got what he wanted right before the season started, he gets injured. And he's still being a big baby. And, well, here we are. As while the 49ers were pushing through for trying to make the playoffs, Ayuk was doing some stupid social media antics, which included speeding through 100 miles per hour around Levi's. What does that tell you about Ayuk's commitment to the team? He basically quit on this team. And the 49ers were right to respond in kind. So it's become apparently clear that the Niners are going to release him. It's the right move for both parties involved. And honestly, yeah, I really dislike how Ayuk is handled like the last year. And honestly, every fan has a right to turn on Ayuk. And it's obvious that Ayuk is not going to get the same amount of money that his next team is, whatever team is going to end up on next, until he cleans up his act. His ego stops. He cleans up his ego. He gets humbled. But I just wonder, why did Ayuk even pull this shit in the first place? If he wanted to get let go in the first place, if he wanted to get traded. And the same thing with John Lynch. Why was he even enabling him last year in the first place in the trade negotiations? Now, that may sound hypocritical, but why did you just release him? Well, that's my thought. But enough about the negatives, because I talked about it in length, because there were plenty of positives in what was it supposed to be a retooling year. Because when the positives kind of sort of outweighed the negatives. Sure, there were plenty of negatives, but for as much as I've been critical about the team at times throughout the season, there were a lot of good things about this team. Notably, the defense. Now, I I criticized this defense a lot this past season for their lack of tackling and busted coverage. However, you know, I kind of let it slide just a tad, but not like completely, because you know they're young, but some of them are like not that great either. But nonetheless, some of their young players, they've shown early returns. They show some promise. Like Upton Stout, he proved to be like a pretty good investment. He's a good on ball, good man-to-man zone guy, physical corner. Jair Brown, he's still on and off, but he rebounded late in the season with his big playability. In the trenches, defensive line, Alfred Collins and CJ West were pretty nice in run coverage. And I'm still not sure why they haven't started at least a game or two, why they were used as reserve players. But one can still hope that they eventually start in the interior defensive line next season. While Michael Williams showed flashes as an edge rusher before he got hurt. So, yeah, looking at this defensive line, it shows some promise for next season. And then probably one of the biggest season-saving moves, if not the biggest, was Jake Moody getting replaced with Eddie Pinheiro. Jake Moody, he had an absolutely terrible performance in the season opener in Seattle. And it was about time Kyle Shanahan finally realized that. Kyle Shanahan finally opened his eyes, finally had enough. And yeah, Jake Moody almost cost them that game against Seattle. And Kyle finally made the move that everyone wanted him to make, and that was waive him And a couple of days later, when they needed a new kicker, they signed Eddie Pinheiro. And this was considered one of the season-saving moves for this team. Had Kyle rolled with Moody this season, imagine how many games they would have lost if he kept relying on him in field goal situations or in clutch time. Pinheiro was near perfect in every game he played. Like, he was automatic. The only kick that he missed was in Indianapolis because he was trying to make a game, not a game time, but he was trying to make a career-long field goal, but it just fell short because it was like short. It hit the crossbar, the center crossbar, and that was it. But other than that, he was pretty automatic this past season. And then you look at the backup quarterback, Mac Jones. They signed Mac Jones in the offseason, being the new Sam Darnold, the new project quarterback for Kyle Shanahan, to rebuild his stock. And when Purdy got hurt with the turf toe in week 1, and they ruled him out for a couple weeks, and then Purdy got hurt again week 4, Mac Jones stepped up to the plate from week 2, and then for a couple more weeks, filling in for Purdy. And while he wasn't always great because of his immobility, that's his biggest weakness, although he did show nice signs of running at times, he made plenty of good plays with smarter mid-range balls, general decision making. Yeah, he was really improved, and I guess, yeah, coaching, I guess, really goes a long way, and that's exactly what Mac Jones needed. He didn't have that with New England, especially when Bill Belichick switched over from Josh McDaniels when he went to the Raiders to Matt Patricia as his offensive coordinator. But in general, yeah, the Niners wouldn't have been in a position to finish where they were had Jones played for as well as he did in those games filling in for Purdy. Speaking for Brock Purdy, yeah, when he came back late in the season, he was balls to the walls. Now you could say that the easy schedule played a role in this, but easy schedule or not, Purdy was playing very well despite still playing with the turf toe, and also in spite of his shitty offensive line. He was scrambling around, using his legs to extend for first downs, and throwing many more mid-range to deep balls than before, such as the case when he was facing the Colts, the Bears, and I believe also against the Titans, if I remember correctly. But anyway, yeah, he was doing so much for this offense. Yes, he also had regrettable interceptions too, regrettable mistakes. But there's no denying that even with the really depleted and talent deficient receiving room, Purdy attempted to make the most of it, and even trying to make the most of the backups. Besides, throwing to his starters in Kittle and McCaffrey. And then last but not least, this whole team, despite all the injuries, injury mania running wild, they had the never seen 17, the last, not that part, because they were not the last real champions this season. They had this never give up mentality until the very end. Even with all the injuries, both the season ending ones and the weekly ones, Kyle Shanahan nor his players didn't lay down like in seasons past. Especially not with last season, not like in 2020. Even despite more players going in and out of the lineup, the season ending injuries, everyone made the most of their opportunity, made the most of their time, especially the young players that were playing. They got valuable experience. The team improved on their 6-11 record, their dead last schedule, and they won 12 games, and they got into the playoffs, really bouncing back from last year. And when you look at how they were compared to last year, and you got very late in the season, somehow, some way, they were in pole position to earn the NFC West and the NFC's top seed in Week 18 against the Seahawks at home. It's just unfortunate that they couldn't do it, unfortunately. for as okay as the defense held Seattle to just 13 points, mainly because aside from the running game, and the run defense did poor against Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker III. The passing game couldn't really do all that much, but they still managed to hold Seattle to just 13 points. But on the offensive side for the 49ers, Brock Purdy didn't play that well. But to be in that position, something a little commendable. It's just unfortunate that Purdy and the rest of the offense couldn't show up that night. But they managed to make the playoffs. And as a 6-seeded wildcard team, they were heavy underdogs, because given the fact that they were severely beaten up in their first round game against Philadelphia, against the defending Super Bowl champion Eagles, who had their own season-long issues, especially on the offense. And in that game against Philadelphia, they managed to knock off and upset the defending champions to guarantee new Super Bowl champions. But unfortunately, going back to Kittle's severe injury that I mentioned way back then in the episode, it came early in the game, and that severe injury ended up being his torn Achilles. And that probably was the dagger to the season. Sure, they want a playoff game despite the season-long injuries, but it came at the price of a major injury. Now, Kittle did say that he was hopeful that he was going to be coming back in November, later this season and the next season, but we shall see. I initially thought it was going to be one of those cases where he's not going to come back at all next season, but we'll see. I'm hopeful he's true to his word that he can come back next season. So the season did unfortunately come to the end. The following game in Seattle, where they had their Cinderella dreams of playing the Super Bowl on their home turf, being that team of destiny. They got absolutely crushed in an embarrassing divisional loss to the top seeded Seahawks. The injuries, you could say the injuries and the talent deficit finally came to collect for them. And it was you could also say that it was a game that that loss was expected. But was it expected was how. And that's the thing that I touched on in that review I did for that divisional game, was how they lost that game. Even with all the bodies that were still there, they didn't show up to play. They looked disinterested to play in that game. Even if they were playing a clearly superior Seattle team, they could have put in some effort, but nobody except for Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey, they didn't show up to play. They looked severely unprepared to play in that game, both physically, mentally, and emotionally from the jump, like from the very start of that game. Like the only points that they scored was for 2 Eddie Pinheiro field goals. And that's it. And they allowed 41 points. That's embarrassing. And yes, they were beaten up. But I would like to at least see some heart from the team until the end against a better Seahawks team. I'd rather seen, some fight and more points from the 49ers against this Seahawks team. But I guess the silver lining of that embarrassing loss, especially in the big time, in prime time, I hope that this loss will wake Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch into making serious improvements in many, many areas this offseason. So, overall, when you look at this past season, it was crazy. It was some kind of crazy season, especially late in the year. But it came to a very crashing yet an embarrassing end that honestly I kind of was not happy about. But I've kind of gotten over it now. And again, there is that silver lining that perhaps this primetime embarrassment will wake Kyle and John the fuck up and to making some serious big time improvements in this coming off season. So as we look towards the offseason, as we're now at that point, that the Niners and Kyle and John and Jed York, they now are forced to watch the Super Bowl that's taking place on their home turf, on their couch, and pray to God that they're none of them, at least from my point of view, they don't watch that live in the flesh, unless maybe they're trying to do it for motivation purposes. I don't know. But yeah, they're forced to watch one of their division rivals play in their own home stadium for the title. But that's unfortunate. But when we look at the 49ers upcoming current offseason, as it fully kicks in, they have around $39 million to spend. They could get more by restructuring some contracts, releasing a certain receiver by the name of Brandon Ayuk, so they could get some more money later on. But as it stands right now, currently, they have around $39 to $40 million to spend once we get to free agency. Their first round pick in April is the 27th overall pick, so a pretty late draft pick. And then their total draft picks is 7 before we get into compensatory talk. Some of the key free agents is receiver Juwan Jennings, kicker Eddie Pinheiro, punter Thomas Morstead, the long snapper John Weeks. So essentially the whole special teams. Backup tight end Jake Tongus is a restricted free agent, and reserve edge rusher Sam Okiwanko is also a restricted free agent. So some decisions to be made for these key free agents. There's a whole lengthy list of free agents as well, but everyone else besides the ones I mentioned, they can go. They can honestly go. Now, looking at the needs to address for this team in going into another important offseason where they still need to retool, the main one that hopefully they can finally address for once in their life is the offensive line. Blow it up. Blow that fucking offensive line up. It's very offensive in everyone's eyes still. As I repeatedly mentioned all season and in this episode, McKivitz, Brendel, and whoever was at left guard, they sucked ass in all facets of blocking. They all need to be replaced. Fortunately, at least in the case of Brendel, he can be released to add some spending money. Now, not by much, but it's something. Now, McKivitz can go too, but I feel like they may have to keep him just because they're not any right tackles, good right tackles in this free agency, or and maybe not the draft class either, given how few they have compared to last year. But yeah, they may have to keep him around for at least one more year. So yeah, when it comes to the free agency class for offensive linemen, whether it's guard, center, or tackle, it's pretty weak. It is pretty weak unless, something, maybe I'm wrong on that. But the one person that they should target in this free agency class and trying to make an aggressive push for is center Tyler Linderbaum from the Ravens. That is the one person that the 49ers should heavily pursue. He stayed mostly healthy. He blocks the interior very well, and he's a 3-time Pro Bowler as a result of that. So, and he's relatively very young. So, yeah, that's because they didn't do it last year when Drew Dahlman was a very good center. The Bears rebuilt their offensive line. The Eagles still have a very good offensive line. It's time for the Niners and Kyle Shanahan to really take this offensive line very seriously. That big time blowout, that embarrassing blowout where Brock Purdy had to run for his life against that Seattle front four, and he got sacked twice. One of them was for a turnover. That should be the absolute wake-up call. They had, millions of people were watching around the globe, seeing Brock Purdy get embarrassed because his offensive line couldn't do jack shit, which the offensive line also got embarrassed for not blocking for jack shit. So this should be this last game, this final game, the divisional round game, should be the wake-up call. And hopefully it should force Kyle Shanahan in John Lynch's hand. And if they're not going to do it, Jed York should force their hand. He should force their hand into making John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan invest in the offensive line. And that starts with trying to aggressively pursue Tyler Linderbaum in free agency. As for the left guard position, they may have to bring in a cheaper option though and draft a mid to late round guard just to freshen up the competition, and hopefully it's a good one. Trent Williams confirmed he's returning next season at left tackle, but he does have a big cap hit, so you might have to restructure that contract. But Kyle and John should use one of their draft picks, maybe in the later rounds, to get his successor, because you don't know how long Trent Williams is going to have left. Probably next year, could be his last year or the following year, but they're not going to have a lot of time left for Trent Williams in the NFL. And also, meanwhile, you have to fire the entire strength and conditioning staff, that medical staff, especially his vice president. Like, how long? Like, why is he still there for like 8 years? And yeah, injury mania continues to run wild on this team. Fire the entire strength, conditioning, and medical staff. Like, forget the substation conspiracy theory. Like, I want that entire medical staff gone. Like, purge it and bring in more qualified ones. Poach some from much more qualified teams like the Rams, the Seahawks, Eagles. I don't care. Get some more qualified individuals there. Kyle, I don't care who it is. Just someone more qualified than whatever you have right now. And then they got to invest in more speedy receivers and get a top number one receiver. Obviously, Brandon Ayuk is surely going to be gone. Juwan Jennings may be gone too if he and his agent asked for more than $15 million a year, which honestly, I don't think Jennings is not worth that much. But even then, they still need to beef up the receiving room. Ricky Pearsall, honestly, he's not really a number one receiver in my eyes, given the fact that, sure, he's a nice vertical threat, but he's more of a 2 or 3. And he's hard to rely on right now until he can prove he could stay healthy for more than 9 games like he was this past season. Jacob Cowing, we don't know how he'll be because he didn't play at all this year with the hamstring injury. And Jordan Watkins is an unknown because, well, he was in the doghouse this past year as a rookie. And it's not just building up the room. They need speed. All the receivers this past year were slow. In free agency, they should look at signing Colts receiver Alec Pierce or the Seahawks' Rashid Shaheed. Maybe steal him there. Arizona's Greg Dortch, Romeo Doubs from the Packers, or even take a stab in the George Pickens sweepstakes. Maybe take a look at George Pickens. Obviously, they do need to look at the draft too, but don't use the first round pick and reach for one again like you did with Pearsall. And then you got to have good replacements ready in case offensive and defensive coordinators Clay Kubiak and Robert Saleh leave for head coaching jobs. Unfortunately, that second half has already happened with losing Robert Saleh for the Titans head coaching job. So, yeah, they have to Shanahan now has to find another his sixth straight defensive coordinator. And the most likely one that Shanahan has in mind is his assistant head coach, Gus Bradley, who previously was the coordinator for the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Colts. But honestly, it's a downgrade because Bradley's previous defenses, especially during his time with the Colts, it really struggled. So hopefully Kyle will look elsewhere outside the organization to make a schematic change. Look somewhere else, like Raheem Morris, Jim Schwartz. Convince them to come here. Or maybe look at a recently fired former head coach like Sean McDermott. Make some changes. Change things up. Not go with the same old thing like Gus Bradley. And then you got to continue to invest in the defense. Like their defense, even when they were fully healthy for 3 weeks, was honestly meh in Robert Saleh's second tenure. But it can also be contributed to the youthful personnel, which now, as you look at it, they have that experience that they need. And hopefully they'll carry over to next season. They still need depth around Nick Bosa, Mykel Williams, CJ West, and Alfred Collins. But yeah, they do need some pass rushers especially around the at the edge position. Another linebacker could be helpful to pair with Fred Warner. That's a must because D. Winters and Tatum Bethune produce mixed to bad results in his absence. And lastly, the secondary can also use some help behind Diamador Lenore, Upton Stout, and Renardo Green through the draft. Or maybe they can find an underrated gem in free agency or even an undrafted free agent in the draft. And then lastly, I know it's a lengthy list. They have to re-sign Eddie Pinheiro. This has to be another one of the top priorities. Like the top priority. Because again, Eddie Pinheiro was one of the season-saving people for the 49ers. Like they have to do this as soon as free agency begins. Reward him with the multi-year contract, but not too much money. Don't overpay for Pinheiro. And then as we talk about the special teams, get him a young punter because Thomas Morstead, kind of old, very old, but get him a young punter like Tommy Townsend or make a qualifying offer for Matt Ariza from the Chiefs. So yeah, Ariza could be a pretty good pickup, a very good pickup too, because damn, he was awesome in Kansas City. So as we close things out with this episode, with this season recap for my 49ers, I understood that this was going to be a retooling season of sorts, given they injected some youth, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But they also invest in several things for their then newly extended quarterback in Brock Purdy, like especially the offensive line, and the receiving room. Like they didn't really give him a lot there. And I kind of understand it too because they were dealing with a lot of dead cap, like a lot of dead money. So they didn't really have a lot to spend, but at the same time, you know, they still could have found a way to invest some things for Purdy to work with. That being said, though, they managed to really overachieve and especially overcome injury mania this past year, at least in the regular season, though, to make the playoffs with a young yet injured squad, and they even won a playoff game. I'm just still disappointed, though, in how things ended. But again, the silver lining is maybe and hopefully Kyle and John realized that like that's the wake-up call to give Brock Purdy proper protection, proper receiving weapons, and continuing to build the defense properly. All while they're young. Like making this whole team young and faithful. And this offseason is going to be a very important one for them because of all those things that I just mentioned. Throughout this whole entire episode dedicated to recapping this past season for my 49ers. So hopefully they get this offseason right, because if they don't, they can be shown 1 foot out the door after the 2026 campaign. So, yeah. But, yeah, after this, let me know your takes, your opinions on my San Francisco 49ers and how they did or didn't do this past 2025 campaign. If you're watching this on YouTube, let me know in the comments below, or if you're listening to this on audio, send me a DM on my socials at Very Cold Lasagna, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram. Let's sound off on how my San Francisco 49ers did in their overachieving yet still beating up season, and what they need to do in the offseason to continue their achievements and hopefully finally get their 6th Super Bowl title. Hopefully next year. And hopefully that'll be the season as we get and for a good change. But that is it for this episode of the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. As we close the book on the 49ers 2025 campaign, I have been your host, Dylan Lasagna. This has been episode number 327 of this icy yet spicy podcast. And keep the lasagna very cold in the fridge with your filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And until I see you, when I see you in the next one, peace out.